I'm joined now by the U.S. Ambassador to Canada, Ambassador David Cohen, as he marks 1 year serving as the ambassador between our two countries. He joins me now from the U.S. Embassy in Ottawa. Ambassador, thanks so much for making the time.
Well, thanks very much for having me on your program.
Let's start out with just overall reflections 1 year into your role.
Well, it's been a fantastic year. It's moved so quickly, which is always a good sign. And this is the ambassadorship that I wanted because of the unique relationship between Canada and the United States, and because of the importance of this relationship to the President of the United States. So it's been, I've said that it's been an honor of a lifetime for me to have this appointment, and I've enjoyed literally every minute that I've had up here, including living through my first Ottawa winter.
And I suppose, too, just moving forward now with some of the biggest issues that are shaping the relationship between our two countries, I guess, what was your initial understanding of that when you went into the role, and what is your understanding of that now? And again, just looking kind of broadly and more generally at the relationship between our two countries, how has that changed over the past year, if at all?
So I don't know that the issues have changed. I think maybe my perception may have changed a little bit. I mean, I always viewed the relationship between Canada and the United States to be extraordinarily strong. But I knew it was characterized with a handful of disputes. I describe our relationship as being like a family. And think about your own family. You don't agree with everyone in your family all the time. And the test of the strength of your relationship is not whether you have any disagreements, it's how you handle those disagreements. So I was expecting there to be some disagreements, but in the context of a really overwhelmingly powerful and strong and close friendship, allyship, and partnership. I think as I sit here today, if there's one surprise that I've experienced, it's the fact that there is a sense that there's been a loss of trust on the part of Canada in the United States in this relationship. And this is something I've heard from almost everyone I've talked to in Canada, from elected officials and appointed officials at every level of government, to corporate CEOs, to small and medium-sized enterprise founders and executives, to the press, to civil society representatives, and to ordinary Canadians. They asked me, what happened to the United States? You used to be our best friend, and we think we've lost some of that in the translation. And I think that was the most surprising thing about the relationship. But it's something I thought I could do something about. Because I think as the US ambassador to Canada, I can communicate to Canadians that America is back, that we are a full partner, that we really care about this relationship with Canada. I can quote the president saying that for the United States, Canada, there is no partner, ally, or friend who is more important to the United States than Canada. And I can tout the value of this relationship and talk about how we're going to always have Canada's back, and that we're back as a friend, partner, and ally. So that sort of new piece of news has shaped an awful lot about what I've done and the way in which I've chosen to execute my ambassadorship over the past year.
And if you look specifically at some of the issues that are shaping American politics today, just the other day, I spoke with Stephanie Grisham, who served as the Trump administration's White House press secretary, who is, now drifting very far apart from the former president, who now does not agree with practically anything that the former president says. So I guess when you look at the role in which the former president Donald Trump is playing on the American political landscape, how do you see that as impacting a country like Canada if he were to, say, get reelected again?
So I don't like speculating about hypotheticals, but I'm going to go out on a limb here and say that I'm not spending a lot of time worrying about what will happen if Donald Trump were to be reelected, because I don't think he's going to be reelected. I think that what you've seen in the run up to the midterms, what you saw in the midterms, is that Donald Trump's light might finally be dimming. And I think his brand of rhetoric and politics is not what America stands for. And I think more and more Americans are figuring that out. And I think that that's good for democracy. It's good for America. It's good for the relationship between Canada and the United States. It's good for the relationship between the United States and the rest of the world.
I do want to ask you too about the rising cost of living in Canada and also happening in the United States as well, and how various governments, particularly Canada and the US government, who obviously work very closely and align themselves very closely on a large number of issues, on an issue like the cost of living, but obviously it would expand beyond that as well. Over the time that you've been serving as US ambassador, because obviously you're marking your 1 year anniversary of being in that position, what have you noticed as to how closely these two countries really do work together to address some of those important issues?
I think inflation has been identified by both the president and the prime minister as the number one issue that each of our countries faces. Inflation can be crippling to the population. It can create financial pressure. It ultimately can turn the country into a recession, which is why it deserves the attention that it receives. I think that Canada and the United States have talked and coordinated a great deal on reactions to the recession. I'll note that contrary to popular belief, there's not much that a government can do about inflation. Control of inflation is more the job of central banks than it is of parliaments and legislatures, presidents and prime ministers, members of Congress and members of parliament. And so the Central Bank of Canada and the Federal Reserve have had a comparable approach to inflation, to aggressively raise interest rates. And ultimately, that is the number one and most effective weapon to bringing inflation under control. I mean, I will note that the more recent inflation statistics show that while inflation is still unacceptably high, it does appear to have peaked and moderated in both countries. And when you look at some of the most important elements of inflation, like the price of gas, by way of example, price of gas is coming down in both countries, which is part of the contribution to the fact that inflation at least appears to be moderating at this point.
And the US obviously just had their midterm elections as well. What type of an impact, just a very general question, will that have on Canada?
Well, I think the big winner in the midterm elections in the United States was democracy. I think the midterms demonstrated that the United States is still the world's leading democracy, and that if you were an election denier, if you were an extreme MAGA Republican, this election was not kind to you. Most of those candidates lost. And I think it represents the distaste and the rejection by the American public of that attitude and that approach to politics. And so overall, I think these elections were good for Canada. I think they were good for the US-Canada relationship. And I think it's a real signal that democracy really will always prevail over autocracy. and that the close relationship that exists between the United States and Canada is not going to be disrupted by extreme MAGA rhetoric from the right the right wing of the United States.
And then just lastly, before we conclude, as you move on now to serving obviously another year as the ambassador of the United States to Canada, what do you see as some of the biggest issues that you'll have to deal with, and some of the things that you as the ambassador will put on the forefront?
Well, I said when I arrived here that I benefited from the fact that the President of the United States and the Prime Minister of Canada, in their first virtual meeting, which was the President's first summit with any other foreign leader in February of 2021, agreed upon a roadmap for renewed partnership between the United States and Canada that had 6 pillars to pursue as a strategic vision and action plan, and all designed to nurture and grow the relationship between Canada and the United States, and to make sure that we were passing along to our kids and to our kids' kids the constructive way of life that our two countries have enjoyed for 50, 75, 100 years of partnership. So that roadmap is still in place. It continues to provide my blueprint for the priorities of the United States Embassy in Canada. And I layer on top of that the importance of my continuing to send a message that America is back, that we're going to be a great partner to Canada, that we're going to have Canada's back, and that we hope that Canada will have our back, and that it's critically important to both countries to nurture and advance this partnership, to continue to build our economies together, to continue to make up a rock solid defense alliance, and a standard bearer for democracy in the world. And I'm excited about the opportunity to continue to pursue the objectives and the ideals that are set forth in the roadmap.